Welcome to the Puget Sound Estuarium's part of our series of shark talks and dissections that we're doing all this month, where we have our shark exhibit in the house. I'm happy to introduce Professor Amy Cook. She's a professor at Evergreen, and she is about 1,000 times more knowledgeable about sharks than I am, and so we're really happy to have her. Thank you so much, Professor Cook, for being here. We're gonna listen to Professor Cook tell us some amazing things about sharks, and then we are going to be dissecting a shark as well, so you get to learn about their anatomy up close and personal. So with that said, thank you again very much for being here, and I will pass it off to you. Go ahead and take it away, Professor Cook.
Great, thank you very much. So welcome everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started here, share my screen. And so what I want to do today is talk to you about shark and ray behavior. Again, I'm a professor at the Evergreen State College there in Olympia. I'm up at the Friday Harbor Labs in the San Juans at the moment, however. And so one of the things I want to really focus on are some really cool things that sharks do. They're outside of what most people, I think, are really familiar with. So most people are familiar with like feeding behavior. You know, a lot of people have seen the great whites kind of jumping out of the water. A lot of people have seen, you know, some nice footage of things like whale sharks and basking sharks, but what I want to do is focus on some of these lesser known behaviors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about herbivorous sharks. I'm going to talk about a phenomenon called speculative foraging, and then I'm going to talk about sociology of sharks. So how do sharks interact with both their enemies and their friends? So the first thing I want to talk about is this evidence of herbivorous sharks. So the vast majority of sharks are strict carnivores, but there's one species, the bonnethead shark, that appears to be omnivorous. So there have been some diet studies in Tampa Bay, Florida, and off the northwest coast of Florida that have found significant amounts of seagrass in the stomachs of bonnethead sharks. Now, it's entirely possible that, you know, an animal might get some seagrass in its stomach as a result of feeding on other things. So researchers decided to look at this phenomenon in a little bit more detail. So they found several lines of evidence that the bonnetheads are actually actively consuming the seagrass. It's not just something that they're accidentally getting when they're striking at other things. And so some of this evidence includes laboratory studies where sharks were able to gain weight on a diet dominated by seagrass, so 90% by weight. So they were able to actually process and get nutritional value out of that seagrass. The mean digestion of the organic matter in the seagrass was about 44.7%, and that's comparable to a juvenile green sea turtle, which is a species that we know feeds almost exclusively on seagrass. One of the really useful things when you're doing diet analysis is that there are certain elements like carbon and nitrogen that come in several different forms called isotopes. And so these different isotopes of carbon or different isotopes of nitrogen have different numbers of neutrons in the nucleus of the atom. And so the really useful thing for diet studies is that certain potential sources of food like seagrass versus fish have different what are called stable isotope signatures. And there was a very clear stable isotope signature of seagrass in the tissue samples of these bonnethead sharks. So one of the really interesting things about bonnetheads with regards to this consumption of seagrass is at the front of their mouths, they have sort of your classic shearing bladed teeth like you see in many species of sharks that feed on fishes. But near the back, they have these more kind of malariform teeth. And these may help them in kind of the breakdown, the mechanical processing. It's not really chewing, but it's mechanical processing of plant material. Also, they have a fairly acidic stomach, and this is something that we often see in herbivorous animals or omnivorous animals, and that helps the chemical breakdown of plant material. They have enzymes for the breakdown of some of the specific types of things that are found in plant material in both the proximate intestine and the spiral intestine. And then they have the evidence of herbivore type microbiome species of bacteria and fungi and that sort of thing in their hindgut and the distal intestine. So there's a lot of evidence beyond just the stuff I mentioned earlier that there are morphological adaptations that these bonnet heads have to feeding on seagrass. They are not strictly herbivorous, they're actually omnivorous, so they're feeding on both the seagrass, but also on sort of more of a classic shark diet like fishes and crustaceans. But this is the one known example that we have of herbivory feeding on plant material in sharks. So pretty cool stuff. Another really interesting thing around feeding is evidence of speculative foraging in tiger sharks. So when we use the term speculative foraging, what we're basically referring to is a situation where a predator is searching an area when prey items are expected to be abundant. Basically, the animal is coming to the area and it's expecting to find food there, usually at a certain time of year. And so one example of this in tiger sharks occurs at French Frigate Shoals, which is northeast of the Hawaiian Islands. And one of the things that we see in that area is we see sharks coming from, over 1,000 miles away, tiger sharks, at the same time that the albatross chicks are starting to fledge. So some of you may have seen this on TV where you've got, these albatross chicks are sort of coming out of the nest and they basically drop down into the water and they essentially are have to basically learn to fly within a few minutes because the sharks are sitting there. They're just waiting for those chicks to drop down into the water and come and feed on them. So there's a bunch of sharks that are coming from a long ways away, and it appears to be that they're coming largely for this event, this fledging of these albatross chicks. There's also some tiger sharks that are hanging around in this area year round as well. There's another potential example of speculative foraging in tiger sharks that occurs in the Gulf of Mexico. So one of the characteristics of the Gulf of Mexico is that there are a lot of birds that breed in North America and basically travel across the Gulf of Mexico every spring and fall as part of their migration between breeding grounds in North America and wintering grounds in the southern US, the Caribbean, and Central and South America. So what does this have to do with tiger sharks? Well, the timing of the fall bird migration coincides with annual peaks in the relative abundance of newborn tiger sharks in north central Gulf of Mexico. So in this image, these are the birds, the species of birds that have been found in the gut of those young tiger sharks. And a lot of them are moving through the area at the same time where we're seeing a large number of these juvenile tiger sharks. Now, it is more likely that the female tiger sharks are coming in and giving birth to their young in the Gulf of Mexico, where they know that there's going to be a high abundance of potential food than it is that the young individuals are actually moving into this area. But even if the females are the ones that are moving in and then giving birth, there's still an aspect of speculative foraging there. They're moving into an area where they know that there's going to be a lot of food for these young sharks, including all of these birds that basically as they're flying over, they get exhausted, they encounter storms, that sort of thing. They drop down out of the sky and these young tiger sharks are there ready to consume those birds. So another really cool aspect of shark feeding that I think people don't often hear about. Another really cool aspect of shark behavior, and actually elasmobranch behavior, so this includes sharks and rays, is their sociobiology. Until relatively recently, we've just assumed that sharks are pretty solitary, that they're not really interacting much with one another. But as people start to study them more and more, they find that there is some significant interactions and some significant social behaviors that we see in sharks. So the term sociobiology is the study of social behavior and organization in animals. And so I'm going to give you several examples of this sociobiology in elasmobranchs. So one of the best studied aspects of elasmobranch behavior among themselves, between individuals, is agnostic displays. So agonism is basically a type of behavior that is typically found in competitive context. That is where two individuals are competing over something. And it may be over space, it may be over food, possibly over mates. But basically any behavior related to conflict or competition that includes flighting, fight, freezing, avoidance, that sort of thing that communicates either threat, defense, or appeasement is an example of an agnostic display. And these agnostic displays have key benefits for the animals that engage in them. So one of the major ones is discouragement of would-be competition. So again, if you're competing with another individual over food or space or mates, trying to get competitors to sort of get out of your way and leave that resource to you is a good thing. These displays can be really important because it means that the animals don't actually have to fight with one another. They can essentially use the display as a way to decide who's going to get access to that resource. Another function of agnostic displays or agonistic displays is that they can discourage a predator. So they can be a way for an animal to communicate, I see you, I see the predator, I am aware of you, you can try and go after me, but since I am aware of you, I can probably get away from you, or I can probably attack you. And so overall, the key idea behind these agonistic displays is to decrease the risk of actual direct physical interactions, that is combat, okay? So in sharks and rays, agonistic displays seem to be mainly about defending what we scientists call the idiosphere, which is the animal's personal space. There isn't a whole lot of evidence in sharks or rays of actually defending geographical territory, as we see in a lot of other animals. So a lot of the things I'm going to be showing, or the things I'm going to be showing you here in terms of agonistic displays among elasmobranchs, are mainly focused on telling other sharks or other rays that they're getting into your personal space and to move off. So this is the classic agonistic display that we see in sharks. So this was first described in gray reef sharks, and it's often referred to as the hunched display. And so this display has a number of really important components to it that distinguish the display from basically non-displaying animals. So one key thing is the hunching of the back here, okay? So that hunched back is where the display gets its name. That hunching of the back is usually accompanied by a lifting of the snout and a lowering or depression of the pectoral fins. And so it gives a very different body display than you'd see in a non-displaying animal. It's often also associated with a really dramatic and deliberative movement of the tail fin. So, the tail fin is swept back and forth in a very dramatic manner that's different from when the animal is just normally swimming. So this hunch display is pretty distinctive. And it often includes some locomotory elements as well. So it includes, in addition to the posture of the body, this display also includes often really exaggerated lateral swimming and either rolling or spiral looping like we see in these two images. So in addition to the body itself, the way the body is moving through the water is very distinctive in these displays. Now, this type of display has now been found in quite a number of different species of sharks. And not all species show the full hunch display, but a lot of them show at least one or two of those distinctive elements of it. And so these are all 6 different species of shark. They're showing that bilateral, that pectoral fin depression, that is pushing the pectoral fins down rather than having them off to the side as when the animals are moving through the water normally. So this seems to be really common among a variety of different species of sharks. And having this common display may actually be really useful when sharks are interacting in groups that include other species, because you have this display type that other individuals also identify as an agonistic display, even if they're not the same species. So it means that to some extent, as far as these agonistic displays work, there are a variety of different species of sharks that are essentially speaking the same language in the way they're displaying agonism towards other individuals. So white sharks also engage in the hunched display, but they also have another type of display that is focused on something a little bit different than get out of my space. And this is the tail slap. And so this is a series of images showing a tail slap. So we've got 2 individuals that are approaching one another, and tail slaps seem to happen mainly over in situations where 2 individuals are competing over a particular item of food. So we've got, in this particular situation, a dead seal. And so these 2 individuals are essentially displaying over possession of that dead seal. And so they basically come towards each other. This first individual, it's called intact caudal, turns on its side, slaps the surface of the water. As it comes closer to the other individual, cut caudal, it slaps the water again. Cut caudal returns the gesture with a tail slap of its own. Intact caudal does another tail slap, and then we have 2 tail slaps happening simultaneously. And again, this particular type of display seems to be a way of kind of showing or developing dominance to figure out who's going to end up with that seal. Okay, so we don't know exactly what it is that they're communicating with these displays, but it may have something to do with size or strength or something like that. Essentially, telling the other shark, you don't really want to get in a fight with me over this dead seal because I could probably injure you pretty severely. So it may be a way of kind of showing strength or size or some other aspect of dominance. So this particular display has primarily been seen in white sharks, though it has also been seen in sand tiger sharks as well. So these agonistic displays seem to be restricted to species where individuals really regularly interact with other members of their species, or in some cases, other members of other species, but mainly other members of their species. Solitary species don't have a way to really effectively communicate their displeasure when another individual invades their space. This is potentially problematic. So in their kind of natural moving around in the world, southern stingrays are pretty solitary. They come together during the breeding season, but they don't really interact very much with other individuals outside of that situation. However, we've created a situation that actually brings a bunch of individuals of this normally solitary species together in one place. So this is Stingray City Sandbar in the Grand Caymans. And so starting in 1984, tourist activities started bringing people out here to basically, it's not really diving with the stingrays, it's just kind of wandering around or wading with the stingrays. And as part of the tourist activities, they give people squid to feed to the stingrays. And so it basically is attracting a bunch of these stingrays to this one place because they're all looking for that food, okay? The problem is because they don't have any sort of displays to indicate to one another that, hey, you're getting in my way, or in any sort of competition that happens over food, this coming together of a bunch of individuals in a species that does not have any sort of agonistic display has resulted in a bunch more physical confrontations between individuals. So stingrays that are making use of these tourist sites tend to have a large number of injuries, and in particular, they have a lot of bite marks by conspecifics, that is, other individuals of the same species. So this is an indicator that they're getting into some significant confrontations with other individuals of that species, and as a result, they're actually attacking one another because, again, they don't have that display to, basically figure out who's going to get access to this food or who's going to be in whose space. And so this is actually a really interesting example of a situation where you've got a bunch of individuals of a species that does not have any sort of agonistic display, and seeing what happens when they're all brought together in one place. This is also probably a potential problem in captive environments like aquariums. There are some species that get along really well with other species in mixed species exhibits. There are other species that don't. I don't think anybody's really looked at it in detail, but my suspicion is that those species that don't get along very well with other individuals in the display are probably species like the stingrays that don't have sort of a set agonistic display type behavior that they can use to communicate to other individuals that they're displeased about something that's going on in the tank. So that's the side of sort of, these are my enemies, okay? How do I, signal to my enemies that, they need to keep away, or that this particular resource is mine. The other side of the coin is kind of how sharks and rays interact with their friends. So there are, as people have studied this more and more, increasingly lines of evidence that sharks are forming social networks in these areas where you've got multiple individuals that are coming together. And one example of that is at a site off of Moorea in French Polynesia. Researchers looked at whether or not blacktip reef sharks in the area were forming groups around something other than food. And so one of the key useful things about these blacktip reef sharks is that they're, especially their dorsal fins, have really distinctive colorations. And so you can use those colorations to identify individuals and sort of tell, who's hanging out where on the reef and who's hanging out with who. So as a result of developing these photo collections of individuals, the researchers were able to do these dive surveys and look at the types of behavior that these sharks were engaging in. So some key behaviors that they noticed that were interactions between two or more sharks was nose to tail following. And so that's what we're seeing in A here. So one individual is following closely behind a second individual. Parallel swimming or circling, where you've got two individuals that are swimming side by side for a significantly long period of time. And then loose aggregations, where you're just seeing a group of individuals that seem to be moving and staying together for oftentimes minutes, 30 minutes to an hour or so. And so by using those photos to identify individuals, they were able to look at who are the participants in these various behaviors. And one really cool thing they found was that there in this on this reef, there were several social groups of sharks. And the individuals within a social group engaged in these behaviors, the one that I listed earlier, with one another, but not with individuals outside of the group. So there is some sort of communication going on within that social group of individuals. We don't know what these various behaviors mean from the perspective of the sharks. There are a variety of different things that could be behind it. We don't know what they're trying to communicate to one another, but it's very clear that there are behaviors that they engage in within their social group that they don't engage in with individuals outside of that group. So another example of social networks. So there are several species of sharks that form all-female aggregations. This is also true in some rays. There are many fewer examples of aggregations of males. Most of the ones that have been found have been aggregations of females. One interesting local example is that in Willapa Bay in the summer, there are aggregations of broad-nosed seven-gill sharks that come into the bay, basically spend the summer in the bay, and form these aggregations, many of which are all-female aggregations in various parts of the bay, and then move off and separate during the fall and winter and early spring. We know that these aggregations are happening in Willapa Bay, but we don't really know anything else about what's sort of going on in those aggregations. If anybody out there is interested in, looking for a topic to study in graduate school or a topic to study in some other professional capacity, this is a really interesting question. But there is certainly evidence for social groupings in some of these aggregating species. And one of the best studied is small spotted cat shark. So small spotted cat sharks occur in the Atlantic, particularly in the Eastern Atlantic. They occur both in shallow water and in deep water. At least in Europe, you'll see them in a number of different aquariums, just because they're pretty easy to catch and they're pretty easy to keep. So, but there have been several studies of these cat sharks, and they have found that there are particular behaviors that individuals engage in that seem to be linked to the development of social networks. So you often see individuals within these social networks that are resting close together. They often engage in tactile contact, including sort of pressing their pectoral fins against or curling their pectoral fins around those of other individuals within their social network, or just placing their pectoral fins on the body of other individuals. And so these are behaviors that they engage in with members of their social network, but not with outsiders. So if you've got a group of individuals in the lab that have formed the social network, and you add an individual, an outsider, the individuals in the social network will often ignore that other individual for a little while. They may or may not try to kind of bring that individual into the social network. We're not really sure why or how that introduction of an outsider affects these social networks, but they're definitely behaving in several ways that are very specific to other individuals in their social network. So the take-home message here is that, for species like sharks that are really wide-ranging, it's difficult to study them in the wild. But as we develop better and better ways to observe the behaviors of these animals, we see more and more complexity in their behavior. I was did my undergraduate at the Evergreen State College as well, back in the late 80s. And at that time, what I really, really wanted to study was sharks in Puget Sound. But at that point, we didn't have really any good mechanisms for studying large free-ranging animals like sharks. We do now. We have, radio tags. We have, the ability to identify individuals from photos. We have ways of looking at kind of how closely related individuals are, identifying individuals genetically. We have, better ways of sort of thinking about behavior in sharks and rays. And so this is actually, I think, it's still a wide open field of study that, if you're really interested in looking at shark or ray biology, there's a lot of stuff going on. Just as a last example here, anyone who is familiar with manta rays that have those two little what are called cephalic lobes alongside their mouths, it looks like they can sort of use those cephalic lobes to communicate with other manta rays or other rays. And so that's, something that was just discovered about 2 years ago. So there's a lot of stuff going on out there and trying to better understand the complexity of behavior in these animals. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much for that excellent talk. Very, very interesting stuff. I feel like I know more about how sharks behave than humans at this point. So we're going to open it up to questions. It looks like I'm not seeing any questions in the webinar chat, but we're going to open it up to folks in the Estuarium. Does anyone have any questions for Professor Cook about anything she talked about or anything else that you're curious about? Yeah, go ahead. Question was the social groups that the sharks form, are they long-term, short-term? What is the temporal dynamic, I guess? Like how long do they stick in those groups?
At least in some, it's really hard to study for really long term, but at least in the blacktip reef sharks and in the cat sharks, I think, those social groupings were still there over the course of like a 3-month study. It's hard to really spend, a really long amount of time with these social groups to see just how long they occur. But at least for several months. And actually, excellent. If there are social groups in Willapa Bay with the broad-nosed six-gills, those actually may occur over several years, because we know from some tags and genetic testing that you've got the same individuals that are returning to Willapa Bay and the same part of Willapa Bay year after year. So those may be long-term social groupings.
Answer your question? Okay. All right, anyone else have any questions? Yeah.
So as for the actual study of these behaviors, does it usually happen in a live setting, and then you're kind of diving to go see them, or would it be more of a setting up a camera on certain sharks and then reviewing the footage later?
Yeah, so I think I got that one. Mostly for most of these things, it's been either diving, like with the blacktip reef sharks, or with manta rays, or there's also been work done in the lab. A lot of the work on the cat sharks has been done on the lab. One of the things that they're doing in New Zealand right now, I think it's New Zealand, is using baited camera traps and to sort of develop a catalog of photo ID of the various sharks that occur in the area, and sort of seeing whether or not the same sharks are coming back again and again. And so there's been some of that work done that at least gives you an idea of whether or not the various individuals you're seeing in the particular area are the same individuals over and over again. But a lot of the behavioral stuff has been done on species where you're diving or snorkeling with them. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, very cool. Any other questions?
I have a follow-up question
Sure.
based on Dr. Cook's last answer. Does her job take Dr. Cook many places?
So my job doesn't, but because most of what I work on, because as I say, I started out with a strong interest in studying sharks in Puget Sound, but there wasn't the technology available at that point to do that. So I actually shifted to studying tide pool sculpins, which is what I'm doing right now. But I have done just as part of kind of a scientist on vacation, I've gone to various places. So in particular, I've been to the west coast of Australia, where I did some snorkeling with whale sharks, which is really cool. We also encountered a bunch of white-tip reef sharks just puttering around out in the on the reef where I was snorkeling. And so there's been that, and then over on the east coast of Australia, this isn't sharks, this is also very cool. I did some snorkeling with minke whales in the Great Barrier Reef. That was really nice. So my particular job doesn't take me a huge number of places because the species I'm focusing on are here in Puget Sound. But as a scientist on vacation, I have visited a variety of different places, including Australia and a few places in the Caribbean, Hawaii, that sort of thing.
I have a little bit of follow-up question for that, which is, I think a lot of times people think of sharks, they think of Jaws and oh, I don't want to go in the water because I'm gonna get attacked and things like that. How has your research on their behavior changed, or how does that influence how you think about them when you're out swimming with them, or if you're out in the water?
I usually don't really worry about sharks when I'm in the water with them. And especially people who work on them and interact with them pretty regularly, they've learned that, and as I said earlier, that hunch display is pretty common among a variety of different species, but there are other ways to sort of tell the shark is not happy with you being in the water. And so people who have had a lot of experience with that, a scientist in particular is studying the behavior, I think sort of give us a much better idea of how rare it is for sharks to actually go after us, either as an aggressive act or as an act of thinking that we're food. At the opening of the sociobiology slide, I had an image of 3 tiger sharks at was it Tiger Bay, I think. And so that's a really popular place for people to dive with tiger sharks. I actually would not be comfortable going in the water there because the sharks there, they are really used to people, and they are not really, it's really hard to describe this. You basically have a bunch of sharks in the water. They're all really concerned about the other sharks in the water. And so they are kind of on edge already. And the videos that I've seen from Tiger Bay often show, so you often have this circle of divers, sitting on the bottom with their cameras. And so the tiger sharks will come close to them and they'll sort of bump them away from the camera. The shark doesn't really recognize that as you telling it, you're getting into my space. When it gets bumped by another shark, its response is more likely to be turn around and actually, go after that shark. So in that particular situation, there's sort of this barrier of communication between the people and the sharks that would make me nervous to be in that particular environment. But environments where you're out on the reef, or even if you're diving or snorkeling around here and encounter especially like spiny dogfish or even broad-nosed 7 gills, I don't think in most cases it's all that dangerous. So it's actually given me more confidence with being in the water with sharks to have looked into their behavior in some detail.
Great. Do we have any other questions?
to kind of touch back onto that, sharks don't want to necessarily be around the people that are in the water while filming, or they'll start showing those aggressive behaviors like, hey, you're in my space. Are those behaviors caught on film, like with the bait camera, as frequently as when there are divers filming around?
Oh.
So like the people in the water, are they impacting those behaviors more so than like being observed with the like GoPro that's in the water?
Question.
Well, there's another piece to that particular situation, and that to bring in the tiger sharks, they're also feeding them. And so by providing this situation where there's, this small resource of food that a bunch of sharks are coming to take advantage of, you are changing their behavior. And so, it's very different, I think, to be at these one of these sites where, the sharks are basically used to being fed and they're expecting to be fed, compared to being, out on the reef, even, a few miles away, where you encounter, a tiger shark that's kind of just hanging out in its natural environment. So I think that there are a couple of things about, not quite sure if I'm answering your question here, but I think there's a couple of things about those sorts of situations where you are bringing in sharks with food, and putting them in close proximity to people that are problematic in terms of both modifying their behavior, and also, as I said earlier, this barrier between how humans are trying to communicate and how the sharks are trying to communicate. Does that answer your question?
I guess I'm just inquiring more to the amount of behaviors that you're seeing, the agonistic behaviors being filmed while diving. Are they comparable to the filming that's done by like the bait camera?
So in other words, do you see more of any kind of behaviors when humans are around
Versus like when it's like a
versus if you're catching them on a other kind of
Okay, I see what you mean. I don't think anybody's ever done that comparison. It is, I mean, one of the interesting things with the manta ray work is that the manta rays are using their cephalic lobes to communicate with one another, but they're also showing some kind of cephalic lobe gestures that they seem to be using to communicate something, we don't know what, with humans. So when humans are close by them, they engage in sort of these different cephalic lobe movements more frequently than when they're just kind of on their own swimming around. So there is certainly, and we also definitely see agonistic displays that are towards humans in a variety of different sharks. But it's really hard because they're moving over relatively large areas. It's really hard to get to do the equivalent of what we do on land, where we put out like a game cam or something like that, so we can get video when humans aren't around. So to some extent, yeah, our understanding of kind of what these agonistic displays are and how often they're happening is probably affected by our presence in the water.
Any other questions? All right, excellent. That's fascinating. Thank you so much. All right, so then we are going to move into the dissection portion of our talk. Dr. Cook is going to be hanging out on the Zoom, but we're going to turn it over to Rema, our resident environmental educator. She's going to be conducting the dissection.
And also, so they're called spiny dogfish, right? Yeah. They have a spine on them. So that spine would normally be right here, but when they preserve them, they remove it because it's a dangerous barb, so that we don't hurt ourselves. But before we cut into him, or actually her, I'm sorry, friend shark, I just want to point out some cool morphological things, or some different things about their body and how their body works. So the first thing I wanted to show you is we've got the spherical and the rostrum. So we've got this rostrum here, and this is gonna, well, you know, you can see it as the nose, but basically this helps them go through the water and control how the water is moving around them. And we've got the gills here. See how the gills are gonna take that water in. You can see the you're welcome to come up in a little bit and we can really explore this too when we're done. But yeah, you can see how the water will be passing through those gills. That's the shark water. Nice. You can also see these lines, these lateral lines that go down the shark's body. And these guys actually help their ampullae of Lorentz, which is this feature that these sharks have that uses electromagnetic waves to, like, basically it's like a shark GPS system that's built into their bodies so they know where to go when they're swimming. So you kind of see that. You can also see we've got some good old fashioned pectoral fin, caudal fin, spots too that kind of make them sort of special in the shark world, because not all sharks have that. And another important feature is their counter shading, because if you are a prey item and you're looking up and you're seeing this light body, you're going to be blending in with the sunlight. And if you're looking down, you're going to see this dark body, and that's going to blend in with the dark. Yeah. Oh, right, you mean right here? No. Oh, no, sorry, yeah, no, so this is still here. It's kind of fallen over because they've taken that the bar out, the spiny or spine. Yeah. So, but a lot of times too, with the way that they're preserved and packaged, they're kind of like vacuum sealed. So it kind of makes them a little less, yes, but I just realized that I put my got a little here. Great. So I'm gonna have to watch that. Oh, okay. Really quick. Does anybody want to touch? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So one last thing before we cut in here is that the sharks have this really cool thing called a dermal denticle, which basically means that their skin is like tiny little teeth. Right. And Dr. Cook, do you have any other exciting features that you want to highlight on this bad lady here?
Actually, one thing I wanted to mention, so I periodically teach a class with a native carver, Alex McCarty, and he was telling me the last time we taught this class that one of the traditional uses of the skin of dogfish sharks was as, literally as sandpaper for wood carvings, and that the addition of the oil to that, that process produced this kind of gloss in those carvings that you just can't get any.
So that's one of the reasons why a lot of times there might be a shark attack. For example, that ambulance will detect the sound or like the feeling of a struggling fish or struggling prey item. So they might see somebody, for example, spearfishing, and they'll hear the sound of the struggling fish on the spearfish, and that's what their current will, their electrical currents will like guide them to, and then they'll accidentally bite the human. They're just trying to bite the fish. Yeah, that's actually quite dogfish. Oh, sharks have pretty okay eyes. A lot of them really. But of the shark species, this is one of the ones that have something called mirror-like eyes, and we can explore why in a little bit because it's a pearl-like thing, and the inside of their eyes pop out, grow out. And just so about this specific shark here, this guy can live up to 80 years from the Pacific version, but the ones on the Atlantic side only live 40. Yeah, so these guys are getting all cartilage. So if you feel your ear with your non-gloved hand, that's basically what, not the like goofy part, but the part that's hard, like the bridge of your nose. Did you have your hand up as well?
No.
Have the stretch. Oh, okay, good. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and flip over. Flip over. I don't know why I'm wearing gloves already. I'm with this guy, this girl, like 49 now. I'm sorry. We're gonna name this shark. Samantha, Sammy the shark. So we're gonna do a couple of cuts here. I like to do a short eye cut. Their eye. That is the kind of a good everything that's here. And I did have we have the wrong scalpel blades. So unfortunately, take an extra second to cut it here because it's small, very small. I'm gonna show you. I will actually look at the heart and you can touch the heart with your gloved hand. I say it like that because I teach camp here, which one of you has been to. And don't say exactly what you mean. Take a second with my full blood scalpel here.
Is there another one I can use?
It's because we only have blades. Whoever ordered blades last. So I have one rusted old one, right size, and I have this guy here. Also, sometimes we can cut the stomach open and see if there's like what our shark friend eats. That's the way. Okay, so this is interesting already. So if you are interested in coming up, or if we actually I'm gonna try it an angle. Actually, Noah, can I have you zoom in on the juices of this guy? Pop it in there. Yeah, how much we were talking how much oil and urea is in the shark. Yeah, so that's why you would want to eat it really quickly. Also, something interesting, I don't necessarily see this very often is when you are, I've done a lot of oil necropsies, and when there is a discoloration, a lot of times it means that there's been so you can see there's lots of bruising on this is the liver right here. I'm about to pull the whole thing out. And so you're gonna see why these guys are so oily. Because they have giant, when I say giant, it's like their body, basically one giant liver. So this is the liver. So this is gonna be processing that oil and that urea. So it kind of looks like we have hands now. Sorry, Sammy. But yeah, so you can touch that thing. This is the oiliest part of the body. If you squeeze it, the oil is going to come out. But I'm interested in the fact that there is bruising on this shark. So when they died, they had obviously some kind of bruising to their liver. Maybe they have a liver disease. We also have another gray thing that kind of like the liver. We got the spleen here. And cut the head out.
And Rena, can I make a quick comment about the liver?
Please do.
So that all of that oil that's in the liver of sharks and rays also as well. So they use that oil for a couple of things. One is it's just a storage of calories, but it's also really important in their buoyancy because it makes them a little bit lighter than water. So it's kind of like almost an internal life jacket. And so the oiliness of sharks is strongly related to the use of that oil as a way of kind of keeping them up in the water column, so they don't have to spend energy to stay up in the water column, and they can put all the energy that they are using to move themselves forward.
Also, Dr. Cook, speaking of the liver, do you see all the bruises?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
I've never seen one like this before.
Yeah.
So, do you have any insight as to any liver disease issues with this type of shark?
Yeah, I think these, when they catch them, they usually are catching them by hook and line. So it may be that, as they're bringing the animal up onto the deck, it's thrashing around and getting bruised like that.
Okay. Start out. So that is interesting. Back there. Let's try to get this part out. Yes. Well, not this part. This is the part of the aortic system. Whew, I almost dumped that all over me, and it would not be the first, and it won't be the last time, folks. Yeah, so really quick, I'm gonna grab the spleen out. Do you have anything exciting you wanna say about the spleen, Dr. Cook?
So the spleen is the sharks basically are doing the same thing with their spleen that we're doing, and that is producing white blood cells. And it does some other things as well, and I can never remember what those are. The spleen is one of those things where it's like, let's see, white blood cells, what else?
Excited to get into the stomach. What did he eat today? No, that is not the heart. Trying to get the heart, but sometimes I might have accidentally. Once again, apologies, I'm using the smallest, see if you're watching this in your corner. The tiniest, well, very sharp, but it's very small. See my heart, not my heart, see her heart. So,
There you go.
I was trying to be gentle and a little more respectful than I could. Really trying not to puncture. Because you can actually see the valves. Got this part. Well, this is what I did not want to do. Definitely. But part there. You see how it's connected right here. Yes. There's everything is really great. Oh, you can see the valve on the side. Are you out? Are you mostly out? No, not yet. Okay. So you can see. Yeah, this thing is covered in oil, but you can see the valves of the heart. So if you want to, and if you want to come actually hold the heart of the shark, you can actually beat the heart really very gently. I'm trying to see it. Yeah, you can sort of see there. Dr. Cook, how many chambers do their hearts have?
So sharks have basically 3 chambers to the heart. 4 depending on who you talk to. So there's the sinus venosus, there's 1 atrium, 1 ventricle, and then there's also a structure at the end called the conus arteriosus. That atrium and ventricle is basically the same thing as our atrium and ventricle. One of the things to keep in mind with sharks and fishes and other animals, they're similar to this, is that they've got a single circulation. So that means that the blood passes through the heart once per circuit. For your heart, you actually have 2 ventricles, 2 atria, and so the blood passes through your heart twice on each circuit. So the blood basically is coming from the lungs, where it's being oxygenated. It goes through the heart heart pumps it through the rest of the body, and then it comes back through the veins to the gills, and then back to the heart. So that's different than your circulation as a mammal, where you have a circulation associated with your lungs, separate from a circulation that's associated with your body.
If you want to pause this later and you want to get a good look at this, I've got it here, but you can kind of see what we've been doing so far. You can see those liver slices, you can see that spleen.
Trying to help.
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you, Helper. And then, yeah, we're gonna check out the stomach contents.
So is this another slide?
No, that's just me cutting out so if you look here, you can see the stomach part, so that's a part of the stomach.
Okay.
So if you look to the side here, you can actually see, can you actually zoom in, because this one is pretty clear, the coloration of the stomach. Wow, so we're gonna see if we can find a little fish friend in here, if they have a snack on their way out, We're not gonna eat it. Oh, yeah. I'm glad I've done a lot of this, because this is actually one of the more oily sharks that I've done so far. Probably due to that, those bruising. You can see the stomach now, you see that looks more like an organ the more you cut into it, right? Hopefully. Yeah, that's the stomach. So you can have that for ridges, it's pretty grody. But yeah, definitely don't. Oh, what? There's a shrimp. Yeah. Okay, hold on. Let me show the camera. You can see there's a shrimp. If you want to come, I know you're very excited, so come on up. Yeah. Here's a little shrimp, and then pass it to your friend. Pass that food on. Sometimes these guys even eat squid. They like a lot of fish. Yeah, but they're also into squids and sometimes even eat jellyfish. But during the winter, they don't hunt as much. So they're this is prime eating season, right? So yeah, I have to look a little bit more because there's also this valve here in the stomach. So I'm gonna. Oh yeah, there could be more. Yeah, you can have this one. Hold on. Amy, you have anything exciting to say about the stomach of these guys? And what's the weirdest thing you found in there?
So y'all see all those little folds in the stomach? So those are called rugosa, I think. And it helps the shark to kind of, so, your stomach and, all vertebrate stomachs, the shark stomach, your stomach, one of the ways that they are processing food is that they're the stomach is contracting and relaxing. And all of those various little grooves are part of the musculature of the stomach so that this shark can handle the shrimp that you saw earlier. It can handle fish, it can handle worms, it can handle fairly wide variety.
Okay, so folks, I pretty much have to look at the body laid out here. The last thing I'm gonna do is cut a little bit into the eyeball in case anybody wants to see that. Yeah. So there's a little pearl. I call it the pearl, it's not actually. Oh, like they're not actual pearl? No, but that just came out of the eyeball. So this type of shark, the spiny dogfish, aka the swallows like candy is, are known to have quote unquote mirror-like eyes, and this is the reason why. That is the inside of the eye, yeah. So see, for example, the way that the gill slits work, I'm gonna stick a probe in here. It's like a open. Wait, it's like a little weaving pattern, right? Because you got the water that's going in and out of these guys right here. We have a really cool, that guy right there. So sharks of Puget Sound. So you can actually see a lot of the shark types that we have here and their sizes. And so, for example, some of those sharks we don't have all the time. So you can see actually spiny dogfish is the second smallest on that list, right? Going all the way down to the basking sharks, which have a really cool breeding area, nursery area over by Kayak Point. So there's been some research there. Also, I'll put it on before, that guy right there.
The guys with the really big mouths.
Yes. After we finish this, I usually during the shark month put on this awesome documentary that when I was working at the Seattle Aquarium they were doing a ton of research on right underneath Pier 53 in Seattle. There's a ton of six-gill sharks. They're pretty huge. If you look up, they're a little bit bigger than the blue. They're in between blue and thresher. So we had a ton. We still have them. And they do a bunch of research on them and how they're interacting with the city. I'll put that documentary on later. But if you don't have time, look up Mystery Sharks of Seattle on YouTube. It's really interesting. I quite like that one. It's local. And you can just eat those. Oh, go ahead.
Just FYI, Dr. Cook is back.
Oh, Dr.
Okay.
Cook.
You had any other
Yes,
questions?
I'm
We did.
back.
People were curious about I like to call it the pearl in the eye. Is there any extra interesting functions that you know of that this guy does other than make their eyes more mirror-like?
The,
You know what the
mhm. Yeah, so I'm trying to remember what it's called. Anyway, one of the functions of it is to help re-reflect light into the eye. So this species is found in both shallow habitats and also in deeper habitats. And so when you're down deep like that, it actually really helps to be able to capture as much light as possible.
Does anybody have any other questions for Dr. Cook or me, or who is first? You, help us.
I was really just gonna add on to the reflecting thing because that's something that you see in, if you didn't know, you see it in a lot of animals. Cats are the easiest example. Like if you shine a light on them at night and their eyes reflect back at you, that's it's the same thing as this where they reflect extra light so they can see better at night. So if you ever wonder why you can like see cats' eyes at night, it's because they're adapted to seeing well at night.
Any other questions, folks? Yeah. There definitely is evidence of, we always got one or two questions about the megalodon, and I'm not a megalodon scientist, so I don't know that much about it, but in the East Coast and like warmer places, you can still dive and find their teeth. But yeah, those are presumed extinct. Yeah.
I was gonna ask if like megalodons used to live.
I have no idea. Dr. Cook, do you know if we used to have megalodons in this area? It's too cold, isn't it?
No, I think when megalodons existed, they were basically almost throughout the globe. Basically, wherever there were marine mammals, there were megalodons.
Is that because like pre-ice age?
Yeah.
Warmer? That makes sense. That makes sense.
I remember that, they're related to white sharks, but they're not the same genus or even the same family, I don't think. But they may have had the same sort of ability to keep themselves warm that white sharks do. I mean, white sharks can and salmon sharks and makos can go all the way up, further north than this because they've got the ability to keep themselves warm. And so we think that megalodon might have had that ability too. So that would really expand its range.
Ooh, I have a question for Dr. Cook because I find gross things really interesting. So if you all heard about the Greenland shark has a parasite attached to his eye that slowly creates blindness in the shark. Do we have any interesting parasites for sharks down here? Any of our sharks?
Not that I know of. There was I haven't looked at the paper yet, but there was a paper that came out relatively recently that found that there is another parasitic like a barnacle that essentially gradually kind of bores its way into sharks. I don't know if we have them here, but it also affects the Greenland sharks. The Greenland sharks have a hard life. I mean, they live like 100 or 150 or 200 years, but they, it's not a happy life. Got a lot of parasites that take advantage of that.
But it was 400 years old. Yeah. So imagine that you had a parasite sucking your eyeball for that long. Yeah.
How old?
Well, you would probably have to have a dead one. Is that correct, Dr. Cook? You'd have to have a like up your age. Do you know of any specific ways to tell about sharks in our area about their age post-mortem?
Count the candles on their birthday cake.
Count the candles on their birthday.
So that spine that is no longer on the dogfish shark, there are some people that have used cross-section of the spine to look at age. It's not necessarily, so if you look at the cross-section, there are rings, they're microscopic, but I think there are several researchers who have worked out sort of what each ring corresponds to. It's not necessarily one ring per year, but I think they've looked at using spines to aid sharks.
Trees. And also when I was doing a lot of necropsies on gray whales, there's a function in baleen whales' ears that you can actually cut out the ear canal and they have those same rings.
So is spine like, does it inject like venom?
No, it's more of like, okay, so these guys mostly use their mouths to eat, right? It's more of a defense mechanism. Would you say that's correct, Dr. Cook, for the
Yep.
spine?
Yeah, so they're fed on by larger sharks and whales and seals. And so the whole idea is to make it as painful as possible for an animal to take a bite out of you. And so those spines have, as it was mentioned earlier, they extend basically the length of the dorsal fins. They also have a mild toxin in them. And so that the idea is to try and dissuade, these other predatory animals from feeding on them.
Yeah, that sounds about right. All right, folks, I think we are about at time. So I am glad you had a lot of questions. I hope you had fun.